The morning air was crisp and clean as Boy Scout Troop 237 gathered at the community center parking lot. Excitement buzzed among the 12 teenage boys as they loaded their backpacks into Scoutmaster Jim Harmon's van and the two parent volunteers' SUVs. This weekend camping trip to Oak Ridge National Forest had been planned for months, and everyone was eager to start their adventure. "Remember to double-check your packs," called out Scoutmaster Harmon, a tall man with gray-flecked hair and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. "Once we're in the forest, there's no running back for forgotten supplies." The boys moved quickly, their breath visible in the early morning chill. For many of them, like 16-year-old Michael Chen and his best friend Darius Williams, this trip was special. They were only 2 badges away from reaching Eagle Scout rank, and this weekend's orienteering exercises would help them complete one of those requirements. "Think we'll see any bears?" asked Ryan, one of the younger scouts, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Not likely," Darius laughed, adjusting his red bandana. "But we might spot some deer if we're quiet enough." The drive to Oak Ridge took nearly 2 hours, with the boys singing camp songs and talking about school. When they finally arrived at the trailhead, Scoutmaster Harmon gathered everyone for a quick safety briefing. "Stay with your assigned buddy at all times," he reminded them, pointing to the trail map. "We'll hike 4 miles to Pencrest Clearing today, set up camp, and do our orienteering exercises tomorrow." The forest welcomed them with a canopy of golden and red leaves. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating patterns on the dirt path as they hiked. The boys took turns identifying different trees and plants, putting their scouting knowledge to good use. "Look at these mushrooms," called out Ethan Lopez, squatting near a fallen log. "My field guide says these are oyster mushrooms. They're edible." "Don't even think about it," warned Mr. Peterson, one of the parent volunteers. "We got plenty of food packed." By mid-afternoon, the troop reached Pinecrest Clearing, a beautiful open space surrounded by tall pines and oaks. The boys worked together efficiently, setting up tents, gathering firewood from designated areas only, as they had been taught, and preparing the fire pit. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across their campsite, Scoutmaster Harmon assigned duties for the evening meal. "Michael, Darius, and Jason, you're on firewood duty. Stay within sight of camp," he instructed. "Luke and Ryan, fill the water containers at the stream. Everyone else, let's get dinner started." Michael and Darius headed into the woods near the edge of the clearing, picking up fallen branches and broken limbs. "We need more than this," Darius said after 15 minutes, looking at their small collection. "Let's check a bit further out, just past those big boulders." Michael nodded, and they ventured a little deeper into the forest, still making sure they could see the smoke from the campfire. The forest grew denser here, with more underbrush between the trees. "Do you hear that?" Michael stopped suddenly, his head tilted. Darius paused, listening. At first, there was just the normal forest sounds: branches creaking in the breeze, distant bird calls, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. But then they heard it, a soft sound, almost like a whimper. "Is that a dog?" Darius whispered. "I don't think so," Michael replied, slowly moving toward the sound. "It sounds like—" They pushed aside a thick bush and froze. Huddled against a large oak tree was a small figure in a dirty blue jacket, a child. A little boy with tear-stained cheeks and frightened eyes looked up at them. The scouts had just found something far more important than firewood. For a moment, everyone was frozen in place. The little boy stared up at Michael and Darius with wide, frightened eyes. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. His blue jacket was smudged with dirt, and his small hands clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. "Hey there," Michael said softly, kneeling down to appear less scary to the child. He moved slowly, remembering what he'd learned about approaching lost hikers. "My name is Michael. This is my friend Darius. We're Boy Scouts." The boy blinked but didn't speak. He hugged his stuffed rabbit tighter. "Are you lost?" Darius asked, crouching beside Michael. He kept his voice gentle and calm, though his heart was racing. Finding a small child alone in the woods was serious. The boy's bottom lip trembled. Tears welled up in his eyes again. "It's okay," Michael reassured him. "We can help you. What's your name?" After a long pause, the boy whispered, "Tyler." "That's a cool name," Darius said with a smile. How long have you been out here, Tyler? Instead of answering, Tyler glanced around the forest with a confused look on his face. I don't know where Mommy is. Michael and Darius exchanged worried glances. The temperature would drop quickly once the sun set, and the nights in Oak Ridge Forest could get very cold this time of year. Tyler, we have a camp nearby with our scout troop, Michael explained. There's food and warm blankets. Would you like to come with us? We can help find your mommy. Tyler hesitated, clutching his rabbit even tighter. Mr. Bunny can come too, Darius added, pointing to the stuffed toy. This seemed to help. Tyler nodded slowly, still looking unsure but willing to trust them. Michael reached out his hand, and after a moment, Tyler took it. The boy's fingers were cold to the touch, making Michael wonder how long he had been out here alone. I'm hungry, Tyler mumbled as they carefully helped him to his feet. We've got hot dogs and marshmallows back at camp, Darius told him, and hot chocolate too. As they walked back toward camp, Michael noticed that Tyler limped slightly. Looking down, he saw that one of the boy's shoes was missing, and his sock was torn and dirty. Want a piggyback ride? Michael offered. It might be easier. Tyler nodded, and Michael carefully lifted the small boy onto his back. Tyler wrapped his arms around Michael's neck, still holding tight to his rabbit. Darius, run ahead and tell Scoutmaster Harmon, Michael suggested. I'll bring Tyler along slowly. Darius nodded and jogged toward camp while Michael walked carefully, talking to Tyler about his rabbit to keep the boy calm. Mr. Bunny is my best friend, Tyler said quietly near Michael's ear. He's scared too. Well, you're both safe now, Michael assured him. My scoutmaster knows exactly what to do. He's really smart. When they reached the edge of the clearing, Scoutmaster Harmon was already waiting with a blanket and a concerned expression. The other scouts gathered around curiously but kept their distance when Harmon motioned them back. Hello there, young man, Scoutmaster Harmon said kindly as Michael gently set Tyler down. Let's get you warmed up. He wrapped the blanket around Tyler's shoulders and led him to a log by the fire. Mrs. Jenkins, one of the parent volunteers who worked as a nurse, came over to check Tyler for injuries. As Tyler sipped hot chocolate from a camping mug that seemed enormous in his small hands, Scoutmaster Harmon knelt in front of him. Tyler, can you tell us how you got lost? He asked gently. The little boy looked up, his eyes filling with tears again. Then he said 4 simple words that made everyone's heart sink. Mommy didn't come back. A heavy silence fell over the camp. Those 4 words, Mommy didn't come back, changed everything. This wasn't just a child who had wandered away from a nearby campsite. This was potentially something much more serious. Scoutmaster Harmon kept his face calm, though his mind was racing. When did you last see your mommy, Tyler? He asked, his voice steady and gentle. Tyler's small shoulders moved up and down in a helpless shrug. Yesterday, we were picking the pretty mushrooms. His voice was barely above a whisper. Mrs. Jenkins, the nurse, exchanged a worried glance with Harmon. If the boy had been alone in the woods overnight, it was a miracle he wasn't in worse condition. Tyler, Mrs. Jenkins said softly, Does your tummy hurt? Are you very cold? Tyler shook his head, clutching his mug of hot chocolate. I slept under the big tree. Mr. Bunny kept me safe. Around the campfire, the scouts listened quietly. Some of the younger boys looked scared, while the older ones wore serious expressions. This was far beyond their usual camping adventures. We need to contact the park rangers, Scoutmaster Harmon said to Mr. Peterson. Can you get the emergency radio from the van? Mr. Peterson nodded and hurried away. Meanwhile, Ethan Lopez, whose father was a police officer, sat down near Tyler. Tyler, do you know your last name? Ethan asked. Bennett, Tyler answered, surprising everyone with his clear response. Tyler James Bennett, I'm 4.5. He held up 4 fingers, then added a bent thumb to show the half. That's great, Tyler, Scoutmaster Harmon praised him. Do you know where you live? Tyler's face scrunched up in concentration. In the yellow house, near the big store where Mommy buys food. Not very specific, but at least it was something. Mr. Peterson returned with the emergency radio, his expression grim. There's a problem. The radio isn't picking up any signal. We must be in a dead zone. Scoutmaster Harmon frowned. Keep trying. Move around the clearing and see if you can find a spot with reception. While Mr. Peterson worked with the radio, Mrs. Jenkins continued to check Tyler for injuries. Besides the missing shoe, he had some scratches on his hands and a small bruise on his forehead, but nothing serious. "You're a very brave boy," she told him, helping him into a clean, dry pair of socks that one of the younger scouts had offered. Michael sat down beside Tyler. "Can you tell us more about where you were with your mom? Was it far from here?" Tyler looked around, his eyes filling with uncertainty. There was a big rock shaped like a turtle, and yellow flowers. "Turtle Rock," Jason, one of the other scouts, said immediately. "That's about 2 miles east of here. My dad and I hiked there last month." Scoutmaster Harmon nodded. "Good thinking, Jason. That gives us a place to start." Night was falling quickly now, the forest growing darker around their campfire. Mr. Peterson was still unable to get a radio signal. The situation was becoming more urgent. "We need to make some decisions," Scoutmaster Harmon announced, gathering the troop. "Tyler's mother might be injured or lost herself. She's been missing since yesterday, according to Tyler." "We should search for her," Darius said firmly. Several other scouts nodded in agreement. "It's getting dark," Mrs. Jenkins pointed out. "Searching the woods at night is dangerous." "But if she's hurt, she might not survive another night out there," Michael argued. Scoutmaster Harmon looked at the eager, concerned faces of his scouts, then at little Tyler, who was now falling asleep against Mrs. Jenkins' shoulder. The weight of responsibility was heavy on his shoulders. "Here's what we'll do," he finally said. "We'll divide into groups. 2 adults and 4 scouts will stay here with Tyler. The rest of us will take flashlights and emergency supplies and head toward Turtle Rock. We'll mark our trail clearly and search until midnight. If we haven't found anything by then, we return to camp and head out at first light." He paused, looking each scout in the eye. "This is real wilderness rescue now, not practice. Everything you've learned in Scouts, this is when it matters." The boys straightened their shoulders, suddenly looking older than their years. There was a mother missing somewhere in the vast forest, and her little boy was counting on them. The scouts moved with purpose as they prepared for the search mission. Scoutmaster Harmon divided them into 2 teams, the camp team and the search team. "Mrs. Jenkins will stay here with Tyler and 4 of you younger scouts," he instructed. "Michael, Darius, Ethan, Jason, and the rest will come with me and Mr. Peterson to search for Tyler's mother." The boys packed their emergency kits with flashlights, extra batteries, first aid supplies, water bottles, and energy bars. Each scout also took a whistle and placed it around his neck. 3 short blasts means you found something, Harmon reminded them. 1 long blast means you need help. Before leaving, Michael knelt beside Tyler, who was now wrapped in a sleeping bag near the fire, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion. "Tyler, can you tell us what your mommy looks like? What was she wearing?" Tyler rubbed his eyes. "Mommy has yellow hair and a ponytail. She was wearing her green jacket and blue pants." "And what's your mommy's name?" Ethan asked. "Mommy," Tyler said simply, then after thinking added, "Sometimes Daddy calls her Sarah." This information was valuable. Now they knew they were looking for a blonde woman named Sarah Bennett, wearing a green jacket. "We'll find your mommy, Tyler," Michael promised. "You get some rest now." As the search team prepared to leave, Scoutmaster Harmon gave final instructions to those staying behind. "If we're not back by morning, or if you manage to get radio contact, send for help. Keep the fire going and make sure Tyler stays warm and hydrated." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her face serious. "Be careful out there." The search team set out, flashlight beams cutting through the growing darkness. They moved in a tight formation with Scoutmaster Harmon in the lead and Mr. Peterson bringing up the rear. Every few yards, they tied bright orange marker ribbons to tree branches to mark their path. "Remember to look for signs of disturbance," Harmon instructed. "Broken branches, footprints, personal items, anything that might indicate someone passed through." The forest was different at night. Sound seemed louder, shadows deeper. The scouts' training kept them focused, but there was no denying the eerie feeling of being in the woods after dark. If Tyler and his mom were picking mushrooms near Turtle Rock, they might have followed the creek, Jason suggested. "That area has lots of oyster mushrooms this time of year." "Good thinking," Scoutmaster Harmon agreed. "Let's head toward the creek and follow it to Turtle Rock." They walked for nearly 40 minutes, calling out Sarah every few minutes and pausing to listen for a response. Only the normal night sounds of the forest answered. Look. Darius suddenly pointed to something caught on a bush. It was a small blue hair tie. Could be Tyler's mom's, Ethan said, carefully removing it from the branch. Tyler said she had her hair in a ponytail. This small discovery energized the team. They continued with renewed purpose, following what now appeared to be a faint trail through the underbrush. The path led them closer to the creek, which was running higher than usual from recent rains. As they approached the water, Michael's flashlight caught something that made his heart jump. Over here, he called urgently. The team gathered around what Michael had found. A small woven basket tipped on its side, with several mushrooms spilled out beside it. Next to the basket was a clear footprint in the mud, an adult-sized hiking boot. This has to be hers, Mr. Peterson said, examining the items without touching them. Scoutmaster Harmon nodded, studying the ground carefully. The footprints lead that way, he pointed downstream, but something's odd about the pattern. They're not evenly spaced. It looks like she might have been running. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through the group. Why would Tyler's mother have been running? And where was she running to or from? 3 possibilities, Harmon said quietly. She was chasing after Tyler, she was being chased by something, or... He didn't finish the sentence, but the scouts understood the third possibility. She could have been running for help after being injured. We need to follow these tracks, Harmon decided. Stay close together. If she's hurt, every minute counts. The scouts moved forward, their flashlights revealing more footprints along the muddy bank of the creek. Each step brought them closer to discovering what had happened to Sarah Bennett, and whether they could bring her back safely to her little boy. The footprints led the search team along the creek bank for another quarter-mile. The scouts moved carefully, keeping their flashlight beams low to the ground to better spot signs of Sarah Bennett's path. The tracks stop here, Ethan announced, crouching down to examine the soft earth. The other scouts gathered around him, their lights creating a pool of brightness in the forest darkness. Scoutmaster Harmon studied the area with experienced eyes. She changed direction here. Look, he pointed to a barely visible impression in the grass. She headed away from the creek, toward those rocks. A cluster of large boulders loomed ahead, their shapes strange and shadowy in the night. As the team approached, they noticed something that made them pause. There's a gap between those 2 biggest rocks, Jason said, almost like a small cave. Michael directed his flashlight beam into the narrow opening. The light revealed nothing but darkness beyond. Sarah? Mrs. Bennett? Scoutmaster Harmon called out, his voice echoing slightly off the stone surfaces. We found your son, Tyler. He's safe. Are you there? Silence answered them. Then, so faint they almost missed it, came a sound. A groan. Someone's in there, Darius exclaimed. Mr. Peterson stepped forward. The opening is too small for me. One of you boys will need to check. I'll go, Michael volunteered. At 16, he was one of the slimmest scouts in the troop, perfect for squeezing through the narrow gap. Take the first aid kit and be careful, Scoutmaster Harmon instructed, handing Michael a small emergency pack. If you find her, assess her condition before moving her. Michael nodded seriously. He removed his backpack and took a deep breath before carefully edging sideways into the gap between the boulders. The space was tight but passable. He inched forward, calling out softly, Mrs. Bennett? Sarah? I'm Michael. I'm here to help. We found Tyler. He's safe. About 6 feet in, the passage widened into a small cave-like space. Michael's flashlight beam swept across the area and stopped when it illuminated a figure huddled against the far wall. A woman with blonde hair pulled back in a now messy ponytail was sitting on the ground, her right leg stretched out awkwardly in front of her. Her green jacket was torn at the sleeve, and her face was pale and streaked with dirt. Tyler? She whispered, her voice cracked and dry. You found Tyler? Yes, ma'am, Michael replied, quickly moving to her side. He's safe back at our campsite with our scout nurse. My name is Michael Chen. I'm with Boy Scout Troop 237. Relief washed over the woman's face, and tears began flowing down her cheeks. Thank God. Is he hurt? I've been so worried. I couldn't get back to him. He's fine, Michael assured her, kneeling beside her. Just a few scratches and he was hungry. What happened to you? Sarah Bennett grimaced in pain. I fell down a slope while chasing after Tyler. He wandered off while we were mushroom hunting. I was calling for him when my foot slipped on some wet leaves. She gestured to her leg. I think my ankle is broken. I tried to crawl back to where I last saw him, but it got dark, and I was disoriented. I found this shelter and hoped someone would find us in the morning. Michael opened the first aid kit and pulled out the emergency blanket. I need to let the others know I found you, he explained, wrapping the silver blanket around her shoulders. Are you hurt anywhere else? Head injury? Bleeding? Just my ankle and some bruises, she answered. But I'm very thirsty. Michael unclipped his water bottle from his belt and helped her take small sips. Don't drink too fast, he cautioned. Then he pulled out his whistle and blew 3 short blasts, the signal that he found something. From outside the rock formation, he heard answering whistles and voices calling his name. In here, he shouted. I found her. She's alive but injured. While waiting for the others, Michael continued his first aid assessment as he'd been trained. Sarah's ankle was swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and she was showing signs of dehydration and mild hypothermia after spending nearly 24 hours trapped in the cold, damp cave. Tyler kept asking about you, Michael told her as he checked her pulse. He's a brave little boy. Fresh tears spilled from Sarah's eyes. I never stopped thinking about him. I was so afraid he wouldn't survive a night alone in the woods. Well, he did, Michael smiled. And now we're going to get you back to him. Behind him, Scoutmaster Harmon's voice called from the passageway. Michael, we're coming in with the stretcher. Help had arrived. The rescue was about to enter its most challenging phase. Getting Sarah Bennett out of the cave proved to be a difficult challenge. The narrow passage that Michael had squeezed through was barely wide enough for the collapsible stretcher the scouts had brought along. We'll need to be extremely careful, Scoutmaster Harmon said after examining Sarah's injured ankle. This is definitely broken. Moving her will cause pain, but we have no choice. Sarah nodded bravely. I can handle it. I just want to get back to Tyler. The scouts worked methodically, just as they had practiced in their first aid training. Ethan and Jason stabilized Sarah's ankle using inflatable splints from their emergency kit, while Darius prepared the stretcher. We're going to give you some pain medication before we move you, Mr. Peterson explained, offering Sarah 2 pills and some water. It's just over-the-counter stuff, but it might take the edge off. While they waited for the medication to start working, Michael sat beside Sarah, helping her sip water and eat a small energy bar to build up her strength. Can you tell me more about what happened? He asked gently. It might help us understand how Tyler ended up so far from here. Sarah's eyes filled with worry as she remembered. We came for a day hike. Tyler loves looking for mushrooms. He calls it treasure hunting. We were near Turtle Rock when Tyler spotted something and suddenly ran off after it. I think it was a rabbit. I called for him to stop, but he was so excited. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I ran after him, but he disappeared into the trees. I was calling his name when I slipped down that slope and felt my ankle snap. The pain was overwhelming. I must have passed out for a while. When I came to, it was getting dark, and I could barely move. I tried crawling in the direction Tyler had gone, but I was disoriented and in so much pain. How did you end up in this cave? Scoutmaster Harmon asked. I dragged myself here when it started getting cold. I was hoping to find Tyler or to stay sheltered until help came. Her voice broke. I never stopped calling for him until my voice gave out. Did he tell you how he survived the night alone? He didn't say much, Michael admitted. Just that Mr. Bunny kept him safe. A small smile appeared on Sarah's pale face. His stuffed rabbit. He takes it everywhere. After 20 minutes, the scouts carefully transferred Sarah onto the stretcher. They had practiced this maneuver during training exercises, but doing it in the cramped space of the cave, with an actual injured person, was much more challenging. On 3, Scoutmaster Harmon directed. 1, 2, 3, lift. Sarah bit her lip to keep from crying out as they raised her onto the stretcher. Once she was secured with straps, they faced their next challenge, getting her through the narrow passage. We'll need to go very slowly, Mr. Peterson instructed. Darius, you lead the way backward through the passage. Michael, you stay at the foot of the stretcher. Jason and Ethan, take the sides. I'll guide from the back. Inch by painful inch, they maneuvered the stretcher through the tight opening. At the narrowest point, they had to tilt the stretcher almost vertically, with Scoutmaster Harmon supporting Sarah's weight from below to prevent her from sliding. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was actually about 30 minutes, they emerged from the rock formation into the open forest. Sarah took deep breaths of the fresh night air, looking up at the stars visible through gaps in the tree canopy. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone would find me." "No one gets left behind," Michael said simply. It was something Scoutmaster Harmon always told them. The journey back to camp would take at least an hour, moving carefully with the stretcher over uneven ground. The team established a rotation system, with pairs of scouts taking turns carrying the stretcher while others lit the path with flashlights. As they began the trek back, Sarah asked quietly, "How much farther until I can see Tyler?" "About a mile and a half," Scoutmaster Harmon answered. "We'll get you there as quick as we safely can." Sarah nodded, her determination visible on her face. She had survived nearly 24 hours of pain, cold, and fear, all while worrying about her son. Now, knowing he was safe, she found the strength to endure just a little longer. The scouts moved forward through the dark forest, their faces serious and focused. This was not a drill or a practice exercise. This was real life, and a mother and child were counting on them. The journey back to camp was slow and difficult. Every 20 minutes, the scouts rotated positions, trading the weight of Sarah's stretcher among them. The forest at night presented many challenges: exposed roots, low-hanging branches, and slippery patches of ground that could easily cause a stumble. "How are you doing, Mrs. Bennett?" Michael asked during one of their brief rest stops. "I've been better," Sarah answered with a weak smile, "but knowing Tyler is safe makes everything bearable." Around midnight, when they were still about half a mile from camp, it began to rain. Light drops at first, then a steady shower that made the ground slick and visibility even worse. "We need to cover Mrs. Bennett," Scoutmaster Harmon instructed. The boys quickly pulled out a waterproof tarp from their emergency supplies and carefully arranged it over Sarah to keep her dry. Despite the rain, the scouts pressed on. Their shoulders ached and their hands were raw from gripping the stretcher handles, but not one of them complained. They understood what was at stake. "I can see the campfire," Daria suddenly called out, pointing ahead where a faint orange glow flickered between the trees. This news gave everyone renewed energy. They picked up their pace slightly, moving as quickly as they safely could over the wet ground. Back at camp, Mrs. Jenkins had kept Tyler comfortable and distracted. After crying for his mother earlier in the evening, the exhausted boy had finally fallen asleep in one of the tents. Mrs. Jenkins had stayed close, checking on him regularly while the 4 younger scouts maintained the campfire and kept watch. When she heard the approaching search team, Mrs. Jenkins gently woke Tyler. "Tyler, honey, I think they found your mommy," she said softly. The little boy sat up, instantly alert despite having been asleep moments before. "Mommy's coming." "Let's go see," Mrs. Jenkins said, helping him into his boots, including the replacement for his missing one, which was actually a sock covered with a plastic bag and secured with duct tape, a classic scout improvisation. As the search team entered the clearing, Tyler broke away from Mrs. Jenkins and ran toward them, his eyes fixed on the stretcher and the person lying on it. "Mommy," he cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "Tyler." Sarah raised her head, reaching out her arms toward her son. Tears streamed down her face as the scouts carefully lowered the stretcher near the fire. Tyler threw himself onto his mother, being careful even in his excitement not to touch her injured leg. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight against her chest. "I was so scared, Mommy," Tyler sobbed. "I couldn't find you." "I know, baby. I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered, stroking his hair. "But you were so brave. You stayed safe until help came, just like we talked about." The scouts stood back, giving mother and son space for their reunion. Many of them wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the scene before them. Mrs. Jenkins approached the stretcher to examine Sarah's injuries. "We need to get you to a hospital," she said after checking the splinted ankle. "But first, let's get you warmed up and more comfortable." The scouts quickly prepared a special area in the largest tent, creating a bed with their sleeping mats stacked together. They carefully moved Sarah inside, with Tyler never leaving her side. The boy curled up next to his mother, clutching Mr. Bunny in one hand and his mother's fingers in the other. Outside the tent, Scoutmaster Harmon gathered the search team. "I'm proud of all of you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "What you did tonight. This is what scouting is really about: being prepared, working as a team, and helping others in need." "Should we try the radio again?" Mr. Peterson asked. "We still need to get her to a hospital." Scoutmaster Harmon nodded. "Let's try from the ridge. If that doesn't work, at first light we'll send 2 runners to the ranger station. It's about 3 miles from here." As the group dispersed to their tasks, Michael lingered for a moment, looking at the tent where Tyler and his mother were reunited. "We did good, didn't we?" Darius asked, coming to stand beside him. Michael nodded. "Yeah, we really did." Inside the tent, despite her pain, Sarah Bennett fell asleep with her son safely in her arms, something she had feared might never happen again. Outside, the scouts kept watch, their faces tired but satisfied in the glow of the campfire as the rain finally began to ease. The first light of dawn broke over the forest, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. By this time, the camp was already bustling with activity. Scoutmaster Harmon had sent Jason and Darius as runners to the ranger station at first light, and the rest of the troop was preparing for the day ahead. In the large tent, Mrs. Jenkins checked on Sarah's condition. The injured woman had slept fitfully through the night, waking often from pain despite the medication they had given her. Tyler remained curled against his mother's side, unwilling to leave her even for a moment. "The swelling in your ankle has increased," Mrs. Jenkins informed Sarah after examining her injury. "We need to get you to a hospital today." Sarah nodded, wincing as she shifted position. "I can't thank you all enough for what you've done." Outside, Michael boiled water for oatmeal while Ethan prepared a special plate for Tyler, oatmeal with extra brown sugar and some dried berries from their trail mix. When the food was ready, Michael brought 2 steaming bowls to the tent. "Breakfast delivery," he announced with a smile, ducking inside. "Special scout breakfast for Tyler and his mom." Tyler sat up, still clutching Mr. Bunny. "Is it yummy?" he asked, his voice small but stronger than the previous evening. "The yummiest," Michael assured him, setting the bowls down carefully. "It'll help you grow big and strong like a scout." As they ate, the distant sound of engines rumbled through the forest. Everyone paused, listening as the noise grew louder. "They're coming," one of the younger scouts shouted from the edge of the clearing. Minutes later, 2 all-terrain vehicles emerged from the trees, followed by Jason and Darius jogging alongside them. 2 park rangers and a paramedic jumped out, quickly assessing the situation. "You boys did an impressive job," the senior ranger said to Scoutmaster Harmon after examining Sarah. "Most adults wouldn't have managed such a successful rescue." The paramedic agreed as he replaced the scout's makeshift splint with a professional one. "Your first aid was textbook perfect. You likely prevented complications by stabilizing the fracture so well." Sarah was carefully transferred to a special rescue basket that could be secured to one of the ATVs. Before they took her away, she asked to speak to the whole troop. The scouts gathered around, standing tall despite their exhaustion from the long night. "I don't have words big enough to thank you," Sarah said, her voice breaking with emotion. "When I realized I couldn't get back to Tyler, I thought—" She paused, unable to complete the terrible thought. "You saved both of us. I will never forget what you've done." Tyler, who would be riding with his mother on the ATV, hugged each scout goodbye. When he reached Michael, he held on a little longer. "Are you a superhero?" he whispered, looking up at the teenager with wide eyes. Michael laughed softly. "No, just a Boy Scout. But you know what? You could be one too someday." "Really?" Tyler's face lit up with excitement. "Really," Michael confirmed. "And you're already brave enough." As the ATVs departed, carrying Sarah, Tyler, and the paramedic to where an ambulance waited at the trailhead, the scouts began breaking camp. Their weekend adventure had turned into something far more significant than they had expected. 3 weeks later, Troop 237 gathered at their regular meeting place in the community center. Scoutmaster Harmon had a surprise announcement. "We have some special guests tonight," he said, gesturing toward the door. Sarah Bennett walked in, still using crutches but looking much healthier than the last time they'd seen her. Behind her came Tyler, wearing a brand new Cub Scout uniform and carrying Mr. Bunny, who now sported a tiny handmade scout neckerchief of his own. Tyler has some news he wanted to share with you himself, Sarah said, smiling proudly at her son. Tyler stepped forward, standing as straight and tall as his small frame allowed. I joined the Cub Scouts, he announced. And when I grow up, I'm going to be just like you guys and save people too. The room erupted in cheers and applause. As the celebration continued around them, Michael caught Darius's eye, and they shared a moment of quiet understanding. Their scouting journey had taught them many skills, but that night in the forest had taught them something far more important: the true meaning of their scout oath, to help other people at all times. Those 4 words that Tyler had spoken in the forest, "Mommy didn't come back," had changed everything. But now, those words were replaced by new ones, filled with hope and promise. I joined the Cub Scouts.